I started keeping bees 50 years ago. And at first I bought my equipment when I had 10 hives of bees. But when I wanted to increase the number of hives of bees, I looked at the prices of woodenware and to supply my operation, and I was floored. I can't afford this. So I learned how to make my own equipment. And I think it's even gotten worse today, that the amount of money that you have to spend to buy a bee box or a cover, it's I don't know how you do it. I guess if you just wanted 10 hives of bees, I mean, you could do it. It's a hobby. But when you want to have 1,000 hives of bees, there's no way you're going to go out and spend $15 on a box and $20 on a cover. There's no way. So I had to teach myself how to make equipment. And I've come up with a pretty good, I make all my equipment now. I have 3 different sides of my apiary. I have the honey production side of my apiary, which is our 10-frame Langstroth hives. I have my queen rearing operation, which consists of mini nukes, 4 or 2-way mini nukes. And the third part of my operation is regular nucleus colonies. And I build all of the equipment. Please, please, safety equipment. Safety has got to be number 1. I've come close. This finger isn't quite as long as it used to be. There's not quite as much meat in that finger as there used to be. You know, I used to be a hell of a dart player until I cut my finger, and then I couldn't hit the side of the board with anymore. But please think about safety. You know, ear protection and eye protection. It's absolutely essential. So I start with lumber. You call it timber, maybe. I start with lumber. I buy pine, eastern white pine from the US. It's really our best wood. It's light, it's easy to mill. It's fairly straight grained. So it's really good for building beehives, building woodenware. I buy it like this. I buy it in bundles of maybe a couple thousand feet at a time. And I use that to build my equipment. It's basically 1 by 12 pine, which is not 1 by 12 pine. It's 3/4 by 11 1/4 or something. Government regulations tell you how big your lumber is going to be. But anyway, so we start there and then we make the equipment. Now this is my machinery. You don't have to have machinery. You probably have to have, this is a table saw. That's probably an essential piece of equipment for building beehives. Yes, you could use the old saw like this, surely. But if you're going to build anything at all, even a cheap table saw. And then this is my miter saw. So I can cut 12 or 14-foot boards into pieces, into proper length pieces. Slightly larger so I can square everything and cut it down to the proper size. And this is a joiner. Some people call them jointers, for straightening edges of boards. And I'll get into this in a minute. But those are the basic machinery. That's the basic machinery I get. The table saw has different kinds of blades. This is a standard blade for a table saw. This is a combination blade, so you can rip and you can cross-cut with the same blade, and I'll have to change blades. These are your dado blades for cutting rabbited joints. This is a stackable dado. Don't buy an adjustable dado. Adjustable dados are rubbish. I mean, they don't make a square cut. They make a grooved cut like this, plus they kick back terribly bad. So don't buy a stackable dado if you're going to do this. There's faults in the lumber. You know, there's knots. So it's really tough to make a bee box with this. You can do it, but you see the bark from the old branch that got embedded in, that knot's going to fall out, and then you're going to have a hole this big in your bee box. Or at the edges of a board, you don't want to have a knot on the edge of your board or a knot that leads to a piece of rot. You can have a knot like that in the middle of the board, as long as it's not on the edge or the side of a board, so you can actually mill the wood. You can actually put a staple through the wood or a nail. You can't put a nail through that. You can't put a nail through that one or that one. It just will crack or break the nail, bend the staple or whatever. but you can cut around it. And that's one of the advantages of my miter saw, that I can cut boards to the proper length and cut around the knots. Some of the faults of boards is a cupped board. It's difficult to mill. If you wanted to mill a straight edge, a rabbet on this, how are you going to mill a straight rabbet on this when you have a cupped board like that? It doesn't work. So how do you fix a cupped board? Water. Why is it cupping? It's cupping because of the difference in expansion and contraction rates of the heartwood and the sapwood. And so it always cups away from the center of the board. Always cups away from the center of the board. Always. A big issue with the way manufacturers now make their equipment, at least in the States, is they don't know this. And when you build a B-box, for instance, you always put the center of the tree, right? It's always cupping away from the center of the tree. You put the center of the tree on the outside of the box. So if you have any cupping, it cups towards the box and holds everything tight. Did you ever have a box where the frame rests, the end of the box cupped out? And what happens? Your frames fall out. You always put the cup towards the center, towards the outside of the box. So how do you straighten that? Water. Seriously. If you have a concrete floor or some kind of an impermeable floor, you spray some water on it. You put the board on the water. It absorbs the water. It's called relaxing the wood. It relaxes the wood. It goes straight again, and now you can mill it. You don't put so much water on it that it changes the dimensions of the wood. Just enough to relax the wood so now you have a straight side. So that's how you fix a cupped board. This is a warped board. How do you do that? Well, a lot of times the wood that you buy in bundles isn't totally dry. And so if you leave the boards exposed on the top of the pile, they warp. Because there's now more moisture on the bottom of the board, which is in contact with the wood, than there is on the top of the board, and it warps up a little bit. Well, you can turn it over till it's straight again. But don't forget that we're cutting these boards into short pieces for B-boxes. So the actual warp between, say, the first 20 inches of it's not going to matter that much. It's not going to be huge. And how about a bowed board? The bowed board is the most difficult. In order to build a box or a cover or anything else, you need at least one straight edge, so that when you pass the straight edge against the fence of the table saw, you get a straight cut. If you just put a bowed board against the fence, the blade actually follows the shape of the bowed board, and you never get a straight cut. So how do you fix that? Well, fixing a bowed board. You don't need an expensive joiner. For many years I did not have a joiner. Somebody in the last few years gave me one. Oh, what a blessing. Just wow. But I used a block plane for many years. Straighten the edge with a block plane until you have a straight enough edge that you can saw with the straight edge against the fence of the table saw and have a straight edge. Do you know how long that takes to straighten? If you want to make 100 boxes, gosh, it's going to take a long time. So a farmer showed me, I told him what I was doing. He says, "Are you crazy? This is a jig. This is a straightening jig. Here's the fence on the table saw, and this is the jig. It's a nice, very straight 2x4 with a stop screwed on one end and another stop for a handle so you can push it. These are actually old rollers from wiring boards that I repurposed. And you don't move the board. You move the jig. And so as you pass the jig along the fence, it's going in a straight line, and you cut off a little bit off of that edge, and now you have a straight edge. Very easy to do, very easy to build. But still, that takes a long time. Takes more time than I like to do. So I was given a joiner. Joiners are awesome. You have a bowed board. You put the concave side down and you run it through, and it hits the front and the back first, the bow, and then takes a little more the second pass so you can hear it. Zzz, zzz. So that, pretty soon when it finally goes zzz, straight, now you have a straight edge to work with. The different kinds of basic cuts, ripping. Ripping is cutting with the grain. Cross-cutting is cutting across the grain. Some recommend a different blade for each. The ripping blade is a little bit wider, because sometimes when you rip a board, you know, it goes together and pinches your blade. Well, you get this a combination blade, you know, and you don't need two blades. So working with the dado blade, before you even start working with the dado blade, to make a rabbet, for instance, suppose you want to make a rabbet on the edge of a board, and that rabbet, that 3/4 inch rabbet, I'm sorry, I don't know millimeters, accepts the 3/4 inch board from the side, but in order to get that rabbet, that 3/4 inch rabbet, to go all the way to the edge of the board, you would have to have the blade touching the metal fence. You can't do that. It'll ruin your fence and it'll ruin your blade. So what you have here is an auxiliary fence. So it's a piece of oak bolted to the fence, and you bring it in about, you know, wherever you need to have it, and you raise the dado blade and it cuts a groove. Now you're working against the auxiliary fence, and you can cut a groove right to the edge of the board without having a burr. There's nothing like having burrs, you know. So basic dado cuts, these are rabbeted cuts, okay. So these are the sides of the front or the back of a bee box, and the sides, which are 3/4 of an inch, fit right into here and there. And you put another front or back on the back, and you glue and staple them, and now it's not a finger joint. It's not this kind. It's a rabbeted joint. I like rabbeted joints. They may not be exactly as strong, but they last longer. They don't rot so much. Finger joints go like this when they expand and contract with moisture. Oh, but I keep them painted. Yeah, but they get moisture from the inside, don't they? And they expand and they contract and they crack the paint and they collect water, and pretty soon the bottom of the rabbets are rotting out. With this, there is only one seam that's exposed to moisture. And if you keep it painted, it's never going to rot along the rabbeted joint. And then, of course, the top is the frame rest. So these are 3/4 of an inch wide to accept the sides of the board, the sides of the box, and these are 5/8 as our frame rest. I see your boxes that, you know, you have so much wood. You have a body, then you have another piece here that creates the frame rest, right? And another one on the bottom, and you have a frame rest that's this big. Don't those lugs on the end of the frame top break off? Are they being that long? I don't know. But that's a rabbeted joint. And that's how they fit together. They fit together. This is the side of the box. This is a front or a back of the box. And it fits together and creates your frame rest. There's a shiplap joint. A shiplap joint is for joining two boards together. There's not glue. For instance, a bottom board, a bottom. You know, you don't want to put them butts like this, because if they shrink, there's a crack in the bottom board. Yes, they'll propolyze it. But this allows expansion and contraction of the joint without ever coming apart, without ever leaking. It forms a good tight seal. So we're going to prepare a board for use. So this is the miter saw, and I'm going to cut a board off here. This is going from that knot to there is going to be the front or back of a bee box, and I have my stops set, say for 20 inches, and my bee box, the board is going to be 19 1/8, and so I set it to 20 just to give me some wiggle room, so I can square the board and cut the end. So that's the board against the stop. And then I straighten the edge. I don't even look to see if there's a bow. I just straighten every edge, because it takes so long to go and then straighten it. Might as well just straighten them all, right? Because almost every board is going to have a slight bow in it. Almost every board. Now I have a straight edge. I can cut the board with the straight edge against the fence and then have a straight edge over here. And that's what I want. I want two straight edges that are parallel. Then I square it. I square the board, one end of the board, with my miter gauge, and I cut just a little bit off the edge so it's square. So now it's square to the two sides. After squaring, I cut it to length. So now I have 4 sides that are square and straight, and that's where you start. If you don't straighten the board and cut everything square like that, you have B boxes that go like this all the time. And they're usable, but then they'll fill the crack with propolis, but it's just not right. So this is some of the equipment I make. This is the bottom board. In the US, we have this standard bottom board called the reversible bottom board. Is that what you have over here, reversible bottom boards? So this allows you to reverse the bottom board, different depending on what season it is. One side is 3/4 of an inch depth here, and the other side is 3/8 of an inch. Now, the 3/8 of an inch is supposed to be to keep the mice out. And the 3/4 inch is supposed to be to give the bees some ventilation room below. Well, I don't know anybody that reverses a reversible bottom board. I ask people all the time, so I can't ask you all because you don't have them. Randy, do you reverse your reversible bottom boards? No, but they still make them. And it's really a bad one because the side rails are rabbited out to accept the body. But now all the weight of the hive is resting on this little board right here that's half cut out right here, and it fails there. That's where it fails. This is a much better bottom. It's more stable. It's got a better base. It's all made with square cut wood. There's nothing fancy about this. This was shown to me by some East Germans that escaped from East Germany in the 50s, and this was their bottom board, and I adopted it completely. I really like this bottom. The whole thing sits on these cleats. It's really a nice bottom board. These are the pieces. This is the body of the bottom, and the cleats, the side cleats and the back cleat, and these are the strips that go on the bottom, and the whole thing is nailed to those and glued and stapled, however you do it. And the bottom boards, each individual board is shiplapped. It's got a shiplap joint, right? So they all fit together like this, and if they shrink, they still stay together. Doesn't matter, they still stay together. That's a shiplap joint. That's one of the places I use a shiplap joint. And you glue and staple the bottoms onto and holds everything together. These are just measuring blocks. I don't have to measure anything. I just put the blocks in, slam it up against there, put it on. It's automatically the right dimension. And this is the bottom board in use. Very good bottom board. This is early spring. There's still a mouse guard. And this first thing they do in the spring when they start to get active again is they clean. And they clean all the debris out from the winter time. And this is what it looks like. And when you go down the rows in the springtime, I don't even have to open, they don't even have to be flying. I can tell you which ones are strong and which ones are not and which ones are dead, because the strong ones have such a pile of debris out front that the bees have been cleaning out. Hive bodies and supers. So these are the hive bodies before the handholds were put on. As you can see, I mean, imagine trying to straighten all those boards with a block plane. I used to. And that's when I was 35. In a couple months, I'm going to be 75. There's no chance that I'm going to use a block plane. And even the jig, the straightening jig, is still time-consuming. The joiner is bzz, bzz, done. So those now have to have handholds put in them. So this is the front or the back of a bee box with the rabbited joints cut. And this one for the frame rest, and this is a similar, better picture of the 3/4 inch rabbet on the side of the box to accept, on the front, you know, the sides, edges to accept the sideboards. And this is the frame rest. And again, it fits together like this. So here's your frame rest, putting the frames on top. And it's only 3/8. When I make a rabbet in a board, it's a 3/4 inch thick board. I make my rabbets half of that. So the rabbets are 3/8 of an inch. So that gives you 3/8 inside and 3/8 outside, and that's really proper. So I don't know what your boards look like. I don't know the measurements of your boards. But if I was going to be doing this with your lumber for your boxes, I would make my rabbet half the thickness, half the depth of the thickness of your wood. So it's, you know, it depends on what kind of wood you use. Handholds. I see so many ideas on the internet about how to cut handholds, and some of them are just ridiculous. I mean, there's so much involved in to have a pretty handhold. What do you need other than a groove in your box to stick your fingers in, right? That's all you really need. So this is my setup for making handholds. So I have a block clamped to my fence, and then I have a stop clamped to the table saw, and here's the center line of my saw, of my blade, and I have a short for short sides and for long sides, and so at first I adjust the fence before I put a clamp on the cleat that holds it, and get the handhold where the blade is going to touch the box where I want it. So that's just setting where the handhold is going to be cut on the box. You don't want the handhold to be below the center of the box because it's always going to be a little tippy. You want the handhold above the center of the box. So that's why I set it to that. And then I put the handhold, put the box against the cleat and the fence, and I make sure that this cleat is square to the box. You know, the box is square to the fence, and now I get to get the cleat square to the box. And it's easy. If there's a space here, it's not square, and you want it square. Measure the depth. Now, as I said, for most of my rabbets, I go half the thickness of the wood, half the depth of the thickness of the wood, which for me is 3/8 of an inch. But 3/8 of an inch, picking up all those bee boxes with a little 3/8 inch handhold, it's killer on your fingers. You know, that's why my fingers look like this. Beekeepers don't get arthritis. Okay, my poor fingers. But that's why. And so I use a 1/2 inch depth on my handholds. And it gives you a little bit more meat to grab onto, a little more wood to grab onto. Your fingers fit better into it. But you don't need the fancy clamshell handhold. Yeah, if you want to do that, fine. There's plenty of YouTubes online about how to make that. So I'm setting it to the depth. And then I put the back of my box against the handhold cleat, and I lower it down onto the blade, and I push it forward 1 inch or 2, and I pick it off. And it makes a perfect handhold in the right place every time. And it's really not that much work. You have to adjust this block for short side, long side, because we have short side, long side. Is your national square? So it wouldn't matter, right? Well, ours are not. So we have to. So I cut all the long ones, and then I change the holder and the cleat, and then I cut the short ones. And what about a crown board? So this is my crown board, and the crown board consists of a rim and a piece of plywood. I use 1/2 inch plywood. I think that the modern crown board, at least in the States, is made incorrectly. Don't I always think this? Truly. The original crown board, we call them inner covers. The original inner cover was flat on one side and recessed on the other side. So in the summertime, you know, our bee space, our bee space, we have top bee space, which means the bee space is above the frames, and the frames are even with the bottom of the box. That's the way we do it. And so if you have a recess in the top and the bottom, you're going to be putting a recess against a bee space, or you're going to be putting a bee space against a bee space. Now you have two bee spaces, and what do they do when there's too wide of a space? They fill it with comb. So you take your crown board off, and it's full of honey and dripping and drone brood and terrible. Properly, you have a flat side. So when you put that down on top of the frames in the summertime, it creates a bee space, not two bee spaces. And then the other side of the rim is a bee space, is 3/8, but that's for winter, because you want communication over the frames for winter. But I make it even bigger. I make it 3/4 instead of 3/8, because I might want to put a piece of fondant in there. And it won't fit in a 3/8 inch space. So I make all mine 3/4 now. I can put fondant, I can put pollen sub in there, and not have to push the cover down. It just fits right on and gives the bees plenty of space to work. So these are the cutouts. These are the rims. This is the front and back rim. These are the side rims. Do you notice anything different, anything similar in these to what I showed in my bee boxes? Isn't it the same cutout? Isn't it the same rabbit to accept the sides? Isn't it? Of course it is. And so this is when I'm assembling it. I have a square built into my bench. So I can assemble the parts against the square. It's a 2x4 and a 2x4, and they're square. I put them in there. I adjust the toggle clamps, and the thing is automatically square. I don't have to put a square on it and hold it with my knee and I'm trying to get the first staple in, you know. And so this is the bottom of the crown board with the 3/4 inch space to accept fondant or a pollen sub, or for winter. And I actually put an upper entrance in mine. I know over here in many places now, beekeepers are saying, don't have an upper entrance. If you have an upper entrance, they lose the heat. They need more honey. Well, I'll tell you what, you come to my climate, and you have only a bottom entrance, a restricted bottom entrance to keep the mice out. And there will be water running down the inside of the hive and out the bottom entrance, because we get so much condensation in the winter. We know we're very cold. We're below 0 Fahrenheit for a lot of days, a lot of nights, and sometimes 20 degrees below Fahrenheit. That makes condensation. And so we have to have some kind of relief to relieve the hive of that excess moisture. It doesn't get rid of all of it. And so on a cold winter morning, I can go out and look at my bees, and there will be, this is down for the winter. So the bees can use that upper entrance. You know, we go from sometime in November until sometime in April, and they never have a flight. There are no cleansing flights. We go 4 months and sometimes 4.5 months or more with no cleansing flight. And our hives are buried in this much snow. So the bottom entrance is closed with snow. So if a cleansing flight presents itself, the possibility, and the bees really need this cleansing flight, they can't take one because they have no way to get out of the hive. So for those two reasons, I use an upper entrance. And I think you know, it works very well. I don't have bees that are dying to be rehydrated. There's plenty of moisture in the hive. They don't, you know, our bees are in a cluster, stuck in a cluster, tight. They're not loose, they're tight. It makes a big difference. And this is using that inner cover or that crown board with the upper entrance. So you see, this is the bottom entrance. with a mouse screen in it to keep the mice out. And this is the top entrance. And the snow is from somewhere to here to somewhere to here. I mean, some years they're buried, totally, completely buried. Haven't seen that in a few years because the climate is warming. But there's always this much snow. So we need that upper entrance for moisture relief and for early cleansing flates. The outer cover, the lid, if you will, this is the outer cover before it's stapled together. It again is made of a body and a rim. And again, the body boards are shiplapped so they can expand and contract and not ever have a crack. And this is the parts of a outer cover or the lid. Do you again see any similarities in the way the boards are cut out? Again, it's the same cutout. It's the same rabbited on the front and back, and the sides attach the same way. There's a difference in that the outer cover is the body of the outer cover are regular pine boards that are 3/4 of an inch thick. So the only difference really would be the depth of the rabbet to accept a 3/4 inch board and not a 1/2 inch piece of plywood. Other than that, it's exactly the same. Everything I make, all the parts I make are almost exactly the same. Possibly a different length, possibly a different width. The rim, this is the rim of the lid. Of course, it's going to be longer and wider because it has to go, it's a telescoping cover. It has to go on the outside of the box, right? So it has to be wider and longer than the box. That's the only difference. And this is installing the body after the rim was stapled together. This is a 3/4 inch rabbet. This is a 3/4 inch rabbet to accept the 3/4 inch body of the outer cover. And these are the parts of my different pieces that I build. Do you see the similarity? These two boards are front and side of a B box. 3/4 inch rabbet to accept the sides, 5/8 rabbet for the frame rest. What's the difference? This is an outer cover. 3/4 inch rabbet to accept the sides and 3/4 inch rabbet to accept the body. What's the difference? This is a crown board. Again, it's a 3/4 inch rabbet to accept the sideboards and a 1/2 inch rabbet to accept the plywood. It's all the same. There's nothing different here. It's all the same cut. It's just slightly different measurements as far as thickness. You know, if you made a super, this is for a B box, for a brood box. Ours are 9 5/8 deep. Well, what about a super? A medium super might be 6 5/8, or a shallow super 5 11/16, or a Illinois 7 and something or whatever. What's the difference? Only the depth of the wood, right? If I wanted this to be a super, a honey super, it would have been cut off here. It's the same cut. This is a bottom board for a double nuke box. There's an entrance on a double nuke box. There's 2 nukes in it, right? There's a divider in the middle of the box so that you can have a nuke on either side, and each one has its own entrance. So you'll have an entrance. This is your entrance. You'll have an entrance on one side for this nuke, and on the other side for that nuke. I always put it facing the box. I always put it on the right side because that's the correct side, the right side. That's the only reason. And then they all match up. So I need to put wrappers on them. The hole is always in the right place. The entrance is 3/8 of an inch deep. Nucleus colony parts. Okay, so this is the bottom board for a double nuke. So it's a 1/2 inch plywood, a rim made out of pine, a cleat in the middle. So when your divided box sits on the bottom, the divider in the box just about touches the cleat, preventing the bees from crossing under the box. Okay. There's no communication in those 2 nukes. The entrance, it's a 3/8 by 3 entrance. Why is it 3/8? So the only difference here it's the same cut basically, but your rabbet is in the center of the board, not at one edge. Why is it at the center? Because I want a bee space above and below the plywood. So you put it in the center. I don't want the plywood to be on the bottom so it's flat on the bottom. Sometimes I put them on top of beehives, and I want a bee space there. So that's why it's in the middle. Other than that, other than the location of the rabbet, it's the exact same cut. 3/4 inch rabbet on the side to accept on the front or back to accept the side. It's the same one. It's the same cut. It's the same work. It's the same work over and over and over. So this is your rim for your box. As I said, 3/8 of an inch opening. That helps keep the mice out, right? You think? I think a mouse can't get in a 3/8 inch unless they chew it. And sure, this one tried until death do us part. And the bees stung her to death. And I had to, I went around, I was to go get my camera, okay? I came back and she was gone. Something had a meal, you know. But anyway, so that's why it's 3/8 of an inch, because it's a really good mouse protection. This is the double nuke box. It's a standard brood box that has a rabbet in the front and in the back that accepts the cleat, it accepts the divider, and the divider is cut, the rabbet is cut through the frame rest so that the divider is up against the wall. So, because if there's a space here, you know the bees are going to go back and forth, and you don't want the bees to go back and forth. So that's the bee box, that's the double nuke box, and that sits on that cleat and prevents the bees from crossing under. And the rabbets in the front and back of the box prevent the bees from crossing around. So they can't cross around the divider, they can't cross under the divider, and now what do you put on top of the box? Well, I used to use seed bags or grain bags, and that works very good. The cover, the lid holds the bag down against the divider, and they propolize it, and now they can't cross over, and they can't cross around, and they can't cross under. They're isolated, and that's what I want in my double nuke boxes. I want the bees to be isolated. This is my crown board for nucleus colonies. As I said, I used to use grain bags. Grain bags are nice. You know, if you want to look at the colony just to see, do they have honey? Do they have a reasonable sized cluster? You just have to peel back the corner of the grain bag, and you can tell. You can see honey, or you jab your hive tool in there, and you come up, oh, it's covered with honey. They got enough for now. Or the cluster is beautiful. I can see the cluster. They got a nice cluster. That's all you have to do. Well, we wrap tar paper around our bees for winter. And the bag sits outside the box, and then the wrapper goes around it. And in the early spring, before I take the wrappers off, I want to check the colony, see if they got enough food. It's kind of hard to check by lifting because you got two. So I want to check to see if they've got enough honey. So you pull the bag out from behind the wrapper, and you can see it. But now you got to tuck the paper back in under the bag back under the paper. It takes longer to stuff the bag back under the paper than it does to check the bees. So I finally got away from that. The guy in Vermont that popularized this, and I got away from the bags, and I started making little half-width crown boards. So the crown boards sit on top of the divider, and they meet on top of the divider. So the bees can't cross over. So it isolates each nucleus colony. So that's my crown board. And you see, there's the rabbeted edge, same as all those other things that I make. It's the same cut. This is how it fits. It fits directly on the divider and isolates each nuke from each other. I have a little feed hole. I can feed through it. I can feed syrup through it. You can be feeding both or I usually put a little piece of duct tape on it, maybe just leave a little opening. But they do not cross over back and forth. They don't. I think probably because the outer cover is sitting on top of the two rims here, and they just don't. When I feed, I have to put an empty shell around the top, right? Like a hive body, a brood box, and then I can put a syrup can or two on top of each one, on top of little cleats, and they still don't cross over. This one doesn't go steal the syrup from that one, and vice versa. They don't. They just don't. They got their own place, and they just stick to that. They're very specific. So this is what it would look like with the double nuke box, with fully stocked, 4 combs in each one. Here's the entrance for this one down here. You can see how nice they get full. They explode, and I'll talk about that tomorrow and the next day. But they absolutely explode in this configuration, in this vertical configuration. It's incredible how fast they explode, how fast they build up. So yes, we have to add additional boxes to them, and I make my supers for the nukes. They're individuals. It's not a double divided box. Because if I want to look at this nuke, I have to take the whole thing off and disturb that nuke. So instead, I have one of these on top of each nuke. Now I can look at this one and not disturb that one. I liked it better. And I don't have to stuff the paper back under the bag back under the paper, which is terrible. It takes a long time. What about mating nuclei? I make my own mating nuclei as well. I used to make 4-way mating nuclei, which is one standard brood box divided in 4, and with an entrance on each one. And I was having real difficulty in the percentages of success, of the percentages of the catch. Sometimes I would, out of 128, we catch 128 mating nukes every 4 days. And sometimes I would only get 50, 60 queens. 60 queens out of 128? 70 queens? I need more than that. If I only get 70 queens out of 128, that means there's 58 failures. So it all takes the same work. So I changed from 4 ways to 2 ways. It almost seemed like the biggest loss I was having was queens not making it back from their mating flight. Why wouldn't they make? They only got one entrance. Yeah, but suppose there's a good wind coming from this direction. It's not that they were getting eaten by dragonflies and birds and getting hit by a truck and getting slammed by a thunderstorm. It was they weren't returning. How do you know that? If there was a failure of the queen cell or a rejection of the queen cell, that would be at the same time they have eggs and young brood, young larvae, and they would raise emergency cells. If the queen fails to come back from her mating flight, at that point, the colony has no larvae or eggs. And so they can't raise a queen cell. And that's how you tell that the queen didn't make it back. There's no queen cells, there's no eggs, there's no queen. She failed to come back to the right hole, or something happened to her out there. So I moved to 2 ways. So this is a 2-way mating nuke. Bottom, body, cover, and there's an entrance on each side. And there's a follower board in here, division board. So there's a division board in here that's movable. So this is the bottom. Does anything look familiar here? It's the same thing, different measurements, but I can have 2 of these. The body, not the bottom, the body, I can put 2 of them on top of a 10-frame Langstroth. And they can go up in there and work together. They can make honey, they can draw comb, they can do whatever they need to do. So I can put 2 of them. So that's one of the advantages of this. It's a half the length. It's the same width. Mine are 16 1/4 here. This is 16 1/4. That's like the front and back of a super or a brood box. And this is half the width of the box, the length of the box. So you can put 2 on top of a box if you want to unite them or whatever. So this is the box with the follower board. You can move the follower board. Actually, the way it is now, it's a 3/4 inch follower board. I can't put 5 combs and 5 combs. So I put, this one might have 5 and this one might have 4. It doesn't really matter. I'm still just catching queens. You know, I don't use standard full-size combs for mating and catching queens. You know, if we're doing 128 nukes every 4 days, do you know how much longer, how much more time it takes to search standard full-size combs than it does little half combs? It's so much easier. You know, you can handle 2 combs at once when they're small ones. And it's pretty amazing because, you know, they're so small that you can have somebody sitting at that mating nuke over here, and this person's pulling one out there, and that person will say, there she is, from over there. And so it really goes quick. We used to do 128 and be done by 2 in the afternoon. Now we do 128 and we're done before noon. Because the crew is just getting better. We're just getting better at all of this. This is the follower board, the division board. It's all rabbited. The sides are rabbited to accept mortise and tenon, basically. They're all got a mortise on here, and here, and here. And the body has a tenon, and a tenon, and a tenon. The reason I do this is because of cupped boards. If you just make it, so you could cut a piece of pine that was that big and slide maybe with a little top bar or something on it and slide it in there, and guess what's going to happen? They're going to cup because of moisture. You can't have them cup. It throws off the measurements. So instead, I rabbit it there, and now because these tenons are inserted into the mortises, it can't cup. It stays in a straight line. There's no nails. It's all glue. Tenons, mortise tenons and glue. I've never had one fail yet. I have had them shrink. And I cut them out. I make them the year before, and I let them dry in my shop. And then I take them out, cut them to depth, and I take them out, and they shrink a little more, and they shrink a bee space. And now the bees are going under. And one of the queens will be gone because the bees went over and killed that one. And that's what it looks like when it's all cut and glued together. The division board, the follower board. This is the cover. It's just a standard migratory cover. You know, it's got the body here, which is one board. I use one board. What is that? I think it's around 10 inches, maybe wide. 10 inches wide, so I can get one piece of pine cut from an 11 1/4 and have it one board on top. This is a mating nuke in use. One of my employees was an art major. Can you tell? So they've got a oilcloth on top as a crown board. Pulling the oilcloth back, it exposes the follower. So you have a nuke here and a nuke here, and that's the follower, and that's the mating yard. And we randomly place them around. We went from maybe getting 70% acceptance, return on queens, going back to 4 ways. So we'd get maybe 80 queens from 128, something like that, to using the 2 ways. The first 3 catches on my 2 ways that I ever had, 105, 109, 105. I think I've discovered something. Well, until this year we had one that was 64 queens out of 128, so there's so many variables. But I seem to be getting better acceptance in my 2 ways than I did in the 4 ways. You know, 4 ways, big old wind comes along, she's supposed to go there, blows her out here like this, and she goes in there, dead. They're going to kill her. So this seems to be working a lot better. And so then anyway, this is my crew, my queen catching crew. We call them the Sultans of Sting. You know, we have a pretty good time. We really enjoy. We work together. We really enjoy catching queens. It's probably the funnest day of the whole system is catching the queens. Except when you get 64 out of 128, that's not so much fun.
Question regarding frames. In America, from all the videos I watch, you seem to have a tradition of tapering the ends of the top bars of the frames. Why is that, please?
Oh, I see. The bottom of the top bar is tapered a little bit. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
If you look down
Well,
on the top of the top
because
bar,
if they're flat on the frame rest, propolis is going to have more of a hold on them than if they were like this. Because then the only contact is here. Is that what you mean?
No, if you look on the top of the top bars, they seem to taper inwards.
On
sides.
like this?
Yes.
I think that's just style. I don't think that's standard. I think mine now are square. The ones that I buy now are square. I don't make the frames, okay? I buy the frames already. Flat pack, and I nail them or staple them together. You know, this finger is prime example. I don't want to be fiddling with little things.
Yep. The follow-up is you have lighting boards. That seems to be traditional in Langstroth hives, yet you don't bother with them on your nukes.
I don't, and they don't seem to need it.
Yeah. I always thought that the bees don't have them on trees, so it's not really
They just land on the
necessity.
side, or they land on the little cluster that's outside, and
Just
they probably don't need it on honey production Langstroths either. They probably don't need it, but tradition, I guess, is...
Yes, I guess so. Thank you very much.
Also, when you stack them on a truck, you know, you can put the nose to nose, and now there's a space this big between rows. So, I mean, if they were flat together like that, there'd be no ventilation. Right. And these bees will come out and go on that hot front. So now you can blow smoke down the channel, and keep them, they stay in the hive better. So, I don't know.
In your individual nukes, you make individual supers, but you put them in a double brood, basically, don't you? Why don't you make individual broods for your nukes?
You're talking about my brood factories, my nucleus colonies.
Yeah, your nucleus
that
colonies.
have a divided box.
Yeah. Why do you have a divided box? I make them with all my nucleuses can stack on one another. So I make my boxes, and if I
And so they're individual standalone
Yeah.
nucleus colonies.
Yeah.
Well, first off, we have this winter, you see.
Yeah.
And the bees, they take heat from each other.
Yeah, no.
And so actually, when you look at the cluster in the spring or the winter, they don't form two individual clusters, you know, like this. They form one cluster like that because they're sharing heat through that divider.
I understand that entirely, and what I do is I put two of them together and put them under a single roof.
Yeah.
So
And that's another advantage because I can use all my roofs fit on all my hives.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly what I do. But because I make my nucleus colonies half a standard box, so by the outside dimension. So you just put them together. So you've got two individuals because we've got 11 frames.
So they're individual, but they're put together,
That's
and
right.
then a communal cover fits on top.
Exactly. But the good thing about it is you say you can't lift yours. You can't see how heavy they are.
Yeah, I can see that.
But
that
I
is
can
an
with
issue
mine.
with me. So I have to pick everything up and and estimate.
Exactly.
Exactly, and estimate, sure. But don't forget that some of my nucleus colonies, I mean, the ones I make each summer, the ones I make in June, they don't stay in one box. I have to get them into 3 boxes, or they'll abscond or swarm on the goldenrod flow when it's hot and humid.
Yeah.
But my brood factories are 5 boxes high. And we start getting 5 boxes high now, they get really tippy.
Exactly. That's the way you put them together.
That's
because
right.
they're,
right.
And I've got, actually on mine, because of the way the national boxes are made, I can put wing nuts in them to hold them together.
All right.
So they just bolt together.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that's good. But the other thing about having individual ones is when you come to, you want to take the bees out of that one to put into
you can shake the
size.
bees that are left in the box.
Yeah,
you can shake them out without having to tip the other one.
That's right.
I know exactly, really.
But thank you very much indeed. But
Thank
that was
you for
just my
saying
comment.
that.
Okay.
You talked about your winters. Ours are getting much warmer. Are your winters getting warmer?
They are getting warmer.
Yeah.
So for instance, deer hunting season. Deer hunting season is from the second Saturday in November until Sunday at sunset after Thanksgiving, which is around the 25th of November. So it's about a 2 or a 2.5 deer hunting season. We always used to have snow for deer season, for tracking, always. Now we almost never have snow on the ground for deer season. So yes, it's absolutely warming. And it's throwing my schedule. It's ruining my schedule because I never know what's going to happen anymore. They had brood in the beginning of November last year. They used to be broodless surely by the middle of October. No?
Wally.
You asked right at the beginning what sort of floors were used in this country now, but I think the majority of people use open mesh floors.
Use what?
Open mesh floors.
Oh,
mesh
yes,
floors.
okay. Yes.
Majority do, and they produce an entirely different in-hive environment.
Absolutely.
I have no idea how it would work in your climate.
Well,
Here, we keep ours with the mesh floor open during the winter.
yeah.
So the bottom of the hive is open.
More
but it is done in
more
such a-
ventilation.
It is done in such a way that it doesn't get very dry. It has a fairly narrow gap
Right.
on the hive stand.
Sure.
And we have top insulation.
Sure.
So the bees will cluster right at the top.
You know, I've considered open mesh floors, but I have, at one time I had 1,000 colonies, so you're talking 500 open mesh floors. There's no chance that I'm going to build 500 open mesh floors in some hopes that it's going to help me in any way. So,
We're all amateur beekeepers, most of us.
right,
I,
We get a lot more time.
right. So I continue to use the solid floors and I have good results.
I think you'll find, Wally, a lot of people are going back to solid floors.
I can't imagine why.
A really good presentation about woodwork.
Thank
You
you.
haven't mentioned your staple gun or your paint yet.
Correct.
Can you expand
Sure.
a bit
So
on
I use a pneumatic staple gun, and I use 2-inch staples and wide crown with glue. And with glue, with a good glue, and that holds very well. And what was the other?
The painting.
Oh, the painting. Well, if you're going to paint your beehives, which you probably should do, put your money into the primer. The primer is the most important. The paint isn't that important. You go to a paint store and you buy cheap paint that was mistinted, or sometimes you might have a collection center where people bring in their gallons of their partially used paints, and so they don't go in the dump, they don't go in the tip, because that's not legal anymore. And so I might take a 5-gallon honey bucket and I get 3 or 4 partial gallons of white, and I get a thing of green, and I mix it all together and I get a nice pastel green. So it's the primer you need to spend the money on. Get good primer, and we'll use whatever latex paint you can, or oil or whatever.